if that's your reality and you're really employing this workism or evangelizing it, it's like this is a religion, but we know that a good majority of you will not be here in 3 years, then you better have some badass system.
There are times that works because it gets them to make leaps they wouldn't have made otherwise. But then obviously it has this impact on culture. So it does not seem that he has a formula.
You and I, having gone through this journey together as founders, it's just so, for me, inspiring and cool to read about these people's direct account of their journey. So it just lands in a huge way.
Welcome to the Digible Dudes Podcast. I'm David.
I'm Reid.
Reid, your goal by the end of today's episode is to make me get the giggles again. Like last episode that I think we had to edit out because it was too bad.
Yeah, I'm still on pins and needles, and now my whole family is, frankly, to see that podcast just to find out what made it through and what didn't. Because Darren definitely have some work on his hands, you know. But Dom was great. I really appreciated him rolling with it, and he sent me a nice little note on LinkedIn. Probably did the same for you, but just that he enjoyed the chat, and he was a great guest. But I have not laughed that hard in, I really don't know how long. It may have been 15 years. And you and I are not known, as we know. That's why I said in the roundup this morning, our reputation is not the gigglers of the company. I think that's fair, right? You have your dad jokes, but I mean, you're usually not in stitches like, like busting your ribs. Right. And God knows I'm not. I mean, I was the class clown growing up. A lot of people find that hard to believe. I enjoyed making people laugh. But yeah, so I do know how to get you going again, because all I have to do is, well, I won't say, but I think I know the path. It's just a matter of whether I'm willing to go to my third grade tactics.
This isn't what we're going to talk about today, but I'll save it for another episode. But you and I talked about the wheel I'm doing based on the Tony Robbins program, and fun is my category of my wheel that scored the lowest. And as you know, I'm trying to
Phantom funds.
Yeah, more often. Which I had one. I wasn't here in time to set up today. It's not as grand as the last one, but my point is I'm trying to get back to the laugh spot. So I wouldn't say I was the class clown, but I definitely, people always, I felt, saw me as like a bright energy, and that's not exactly how like most here would describe me. So I'm excited to get back to that. But today, what we wanted to talk about was, it was a number of months ago that I had read the Elon Musk biography by Walter Isaacson. And I remember, like, right afterwards, as we often do, I try to share a lot of the takeaways I got from it with you. And we said, hey, let's just save it until, we're recording, because, that's what we like to do with this podcast, is whatever we would talk about anyway. So, first of all, I guess you haven't talked to me about a lot of biographies, so I'm curious what your take is on biography. Like, what's your take on biographies in generally?
I find them informative, but I can't help myself questioning I don't want to say the accuracy, because there's certain things that are public, but the positioning, I guess, that, especially, I'll use Musk as an example, but somebody with an ego that large, it's like, how much can I trust, that this is an accurate depiction? Mm-hmm. Because you've heard, and I assume quite literally you have, maybe more than I have, but some of the restraints or constraints that are put on some of these folks when they get, the privilege, I'll say, or the good fortune of like doing a biography on Jobs or on Bezos or on Musk, so if it's a biography of Frederick Douglass, that's different, but right now so much is being written about these tech titans, entrepreneurs, and I think it's super fascinating, and I'm glad you're reading them. I don't know if I'll follow behind you on these. I haven't yet, but if one of them really stands out and you're like, just trust me, like, it's worth some of the noise, like, there's such great takeaways, then you'll probably get me on board. Mm-hmm. But I don't see myself binging the biographies, at least with this kind of circuit, if you know what I mean,
Mhm.
like, around technology and entrepreneur. I'll just use Titans again, but
Yeah.
so yeah, I don't know if that helps a little bit, but your opinion matters a lot. You know that. So if you're like this, just deal with it, Reid. This is a great book. You'll get a lot out of it. Then I'll read it.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because there's been a couple autobiographies you and I have connected a lot with, such as Rand Fishkin's Lost and Founder or Shoe Dog, right? Like with Phil Knight.
Yeah, autobiographies, sorry, but / memoirs. I do enjoy that because I just go eyes wide open. It's like this is their own way of telling it, their own perspective, and something sits a little better with me than having somebody. It's not a ghostwriter, but somebody tell the story, and you could go both ways. It's like, well, isn't it potentially more accurate or better if you have somebody that isn't writing the memoir?
Mm-hmm.
But I can't help it, and I think you relate. And I know, I'm sorry for the interruption, but just you and I having gone through this journey together as founders, it's just so, for me, inspiring and cool to read about these people's direct kind of account of their journey. So it just lands in a huge way, versus what if we hired somebody to write Digible's story? It just doesn't feel, for me, as exciting.
So I'm with you, and I ignored biographies for a pretty long time. You're right about those other ones being more memoirs. But then I stumbled across this podcast maybe 18 months ago, but it's called Founders by this guy, David Sinra. And every week he reads a new biography and then summarizes it for you. And so what I'll often do is I'll listen to his episodes, and then if he's like, my source material was this, and I find it that interesting, then I may go and like listen to the book or what have you. And he changed my mind on it. So what Sinra says is that he loves biographies, and he only does biographies of founders. And he tries to then, what I love that he does is he's now like 500 episodes in or something. So he's done like 500 biographies.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And he then tries to show, and he has actually a system where his notes interconnect. So he can say, this is very similar to Rockefeller, which was similar to Jay-Z, and he'll like connect them all together.
Profiling. Huh?
And so that's helpful because there is so much luck involved, and these biographies tend not to have like the EOS system, right? Or the Who book kind of system, but there are lessons. And so what really got me is when he said his belief is reading biographies is like a cheat code for business, because you get to see someone else's mistake, and it doesn't mean you have to like believe the mistake or what have you. Instead, he says, learn from their mistakes and their successes, but take what you like and then just discard the rest. And so there's a lot with Elon that I feel that way about, where there's a lot of like inspiring things that he's done, but then there's a lot that I'm like, let's throw that out. Like, I definitely don't want to aspire to be that. So I had struggled with this, and I can't remember if I shared this with you, but with my coach, my coach is like, she wanted me to have like, who's the poster you put up on your wall? Like who do you aspire to be like right now? I was like, I've never put a poster on my wall, like even as a kid, like of a sports figure or now. And I said, because there was never someone that I lined up with 100%. And then she kind of took the more Michael Jackson approach, where she's like, you can like someone's music, but not like them as a person or whatever. So she's like, if you find something inspiring about like an Elon or a Bezos, you can say, these are the things I like about that person, but these are the things that they definitely didn't do right. Then bring it back to Sinra for a second. He said that based on everything he's read, all of these founders' stories, he says he can't really point to any of them that had life worked out, where it was well balanced. He's like, there's something like, if you are extraordinary in business, you're often giving up a lot in your personal life or what have you. And so even Sinra, who does this now for a living, he said he doesn't aspire to be any of these people fully, because the amount that you give up, he's not something he's willing to do. So anyways, that's my preface for this, is the cheat code. So then one of the things that I took away, which won't surprise you, so a lot of this will feel obvious because Musk is so in our minds these days, is he's terrific at setting vision and inspiring people towards that vision, and then driving his team like relentlessly to get there. So I took notes of a couple just to help it land. But SpaceX was to make mankind interplanetary. Big vision. Talk about like 100-year goal, right? So that's SpaceX. And he had Tesla, which originally he said was to address climate change by reducing reliance on fossil fuels. And then he added an addendum later that said by revolutionizing both the automotive and energy sectors through innovation and sustainable practices. So that's not quite as like catchy as SpaceX was to make us interplanetary, but still, has some vein of the inspiration in there. And then Neuralink, which is, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but this is like the brain implant company he has. So he wants to basically put a chip in your brain so you can like communicate with your phone basically without touching it. You just think thoughts, that kind of thing.
Super peaceful concept.
Yeah. And he's already started with like this, that like with people that have like lost feeling in their limbs, like where he's starting on the medical front to say, here's how we can cure that. Mm-hmm. But then his ultimate goal is to create direct communication link between the human brain and external devices. So pretty big vision.
Yeah. Such small vision.
Yeah. Let's see. Now what I learned from that is, he was great at setting those visions, but what my takeaway from it is he drives his team he acts or can create this air around him as if like it's do or die the whole way. So it's very common for people to join his companies, and you kind of it's almost that whole like workism. We should talk about that at some point. But there's this New Yorker journalist who coined this term workism, and the small preface of workism is, 150 years ago, people had religion in their lives, and it was like 9 out of 10 people had some sort of faith. But over the last 100 years, that has dropped from 9 out of 10 people to 6 out of 10 people. And really that's in the last 20 years. 6 out of 10 people now have some sort of faith, but that they practice. And what this workism is the belief that many people are now they have this gap, this purpose gap that religion used to fill for them, and now they're filling it with work. And that's how they get very wrapped up emotionally, personally, in whatever company they're with, which can, I feel like Musk really harnesses, because he turns these companies almost cult-like in how hard you have to pursue it. But then there can come a point where he totally burns you out, or you want to have a family, and then you're kicked out of the cult. It's like you left the church, and now the person that got kicked out can have a very bad reaction. They don't often have fond memories of like, oh, I loved working at SpaceX where I was sleeping under my desk, for 4 years straight and never saw my family. So there can be these real negative things that come from setting such aggressive vision. And that means you need to be killer at recruiting if that's what you follow, right? Because you got to be replacing this top talent, and you have this major leakage of brain power, of historical brain power as someone turns over.
Lots of points of entry here, but I'll start with the end. Is there any disclosure as related to churn, like at any one of these companies, like kind of validating your point?
Yeah, I mean, Tesla's public now, so I would think you could find something there. But in the biography, I don't remember them covering anything about churn numbers.
Makes me think about like the whole Normandy, like as they're getting ready to come onto the beach. Look to the left, look to the right. At least one of you is not going to make it. But is it that kind of churn? And if it is, I don't know if the book shares a little here either, but it's a great way of putting it. I think you said the leaky bucket of like the brain kind of trust or resources that are casualties of this churn. So how do they handle that? Are they is documentation? Is it, I'm just curious, like from, if that's your reality and you're really employing this workism or evangelizing it. It's like, this is a religion, but we know that a good majority of you will not be here in 3 years. Then you better have some badass system, right, to protect against all the damage that comes when you lose that many people. So I'm also interested, since this is one that I was going to see if you saw any common denominators with some of the other bios that you've read, on at least the big ones. I know you read Jobs and Bezos. I'm sure you've read others that I don't know about, but I have, Gates and Thiel and Hoffman, Horowitz, of course, our buddies over at Google. But if they get quotes, I guess, or perspective from these legends on how they think about the sacrifice that they make, or do they not see it as a sacrifice actually at all? And so this is interesting because I just wrapped up the book Mastery, which you can return serve on me, a few weeks from now if necessary. But he said one of the biggest misconceptions about geniuses, and he said, but he actually is very critical of the word genius. He was like, so that he prefers masters. He's like, people like to just label and say it's all about how smart they were. It's like, you're not giving credit for how hard these people work, how, as you're using the word, relentless they were pursuing their vision and their craft and all this stuff. And so many also label these types of people as narcissists, as self-absorbed, egotistical, willing to ignore all other aspects of life. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but his theory is just the opposite. He's like, it is actually more selfless than it is narcissistic or selfish. When you are willing to give that much of your time and yourself to, and it may not be serve mankind per se, but to change the world, to transform things. And so instead of just jumping to that easy conclusion of they don't care about anybody but themselves, no, they're just passionate to a degree few of us can actually relate to or comprehend about their mission, their craft, their, whatever that vision may be. So it was helpful for me because I won't lie. I am one of those often when we talk about these types of, icons, I'm just like megalomaniacs, don't care about anybody, you are going to work, 120 hours. And if you can't deal with it, get out of my way. And I think that this book helped me see it a little differently. I still think there's aspects of that. But bringing this all the way back to a question, was there in this biography, how much of did Elon show some vulnerability or address his, kind of, I don't want to call it maniacal because now I'm labeling him, but pursuit, extraordinary work ethic and drive, just the vulnerability. Like, did he speak to any of that? Or was it more just like covering the different chapters, meaning companies and all that stuff?
Yeah, this was less things in his own words.
Okay.
Isaacson followed him around for 2 years, and Isaacson's the same one that wrote the Jobs biography.
Oh, so, right. I do have that. It's on my shelf, but
okay. It's good. Yeah, Isaacson does a great job, but it was more through like he followed him, I think, for 2 years and interviewed, over 100 people. And it was more about his, like, he did tell the history of Musk up to this point. And he didn't really pull punches. I remember at one point, Elon had asked him, like, should I read it? And he said, no, you probably don't want to read the book. And, Isaacson figured that, Elon is so...
I don't want to mysteriously want to find myself on the first rocket to Mars.
Yeah. Well, he also figured, like, even if he told Elon to read it, that he wouldn't. That he would just be like, he's so consumed with doing his other things. So it definitely wasn't a rosy picture. It's kind of speaks a lot to what you're describing with Mastery. But yeah, so it wasn't, does Elon think it's worth it? But one thing I thought was interesting was I, until this book, had never heard of a time that Elon was stressed. Because like when he's like acting out on social media or what have you, it takes it as if it is like a class clown, like everything's kind of like can be a joke. And so I just hadn't. It's that whole thing where you often don't see other people as human, but they talk about how bad his stomach is because of how stressed he gets about. Almost what he feels is, it seems as if he feels it's his responsibility to save mankind. Almost that kind of, like, I guess you could think of it like a messiah complex.
It is a messiah complex.
But it's like, am I glad he exists? I am. I'm glad that there's someone like him. It's not for me. Right. But to your point about other founders, I recently heard an interview with the founder of NVIDIA, which, is that graphics card company that now everyone's using for their AI and machine learning. And he's been, that founder's been CEO since the company founded in the early 90s or late 80s. And he said it's not worth it. He's like, if I could go back, I wouldn't do it, which is fascinating. From now, like, I forget if it's like the 9th or 10th most valuable company in the world now, but yeah, there's many of these people that do feel similar to like the Rand Fishkin book, where he was like, it wasn't worth it, so. But moving on to the next part, I thought this was super interesting for us in multifamily and in marketing. But in the early days, Elon had this vision to make Tesla factories completely autonomous, like 100% robotic. And I told you a little bit about this before. So he had spent incredible resources to make every part of the car assembled by a robot and not a human. And then when they were really at death's door, where it didn't seem like Tesla was going to produce enough cars, they didn't have the cash flow, like they were going to go defunct. He, as we've all heard, he jumped down onto the factory lines and was just walking, the floor. And he was like, why is this, why is the window not going in faster? And they're like, well, it's really challenging for a robot to put a rubber seal all around the driver's side door. It fails like 2 out of 5 times. And so we have to reset it. And he's like, well, then why aren't we using a person? And they're like, well, you want everything autonomous. He's like, I do, but also let's think for ourselves. And if we can pay someone $17 an hour and they have 100% accuracy rate of getting this thing and it doesn't slow the line, the company lives. And so I thought that was super fascinating, because we, even here at Digible, we've moved towards, it feels as if at times we've moved towards like we can automate everything. But he learned a valuable lesson through that chapter, where he basically went down the line and just started spray painting robots to remove. He's like, replace these people with like $17, $20 an hour workers, higher accuracy, faster, less maintenance, yada, yada. And, they made it out of it. Similarly, he had another lesson that he works a lot off of first principles. So this is something I think we can also take away, us and our marketers that are listening. But when cars weren't shipping fast enough, they were often saying, well, he asked why. And one of the reasons was like, our batteries aren't coming. Like we're not getting enough batteries to deliver the cars. And he's like, well, what's the battery problem? And they're like, I don't know. They just said they can't ship them. So then he visits the battery factory, and the battery factory is like, yeah, I mean, we can produce enough batteries, but we can't ship enough, to the other factory. He's like, why can't you ship enough? Well, there's this plastic cap that we put on the pins of the battery to protect it during shipping. He's like, okay. So you don't have enough plastic caps? He's like, yeah, we don't have enough of these plastic caps. He's like, well, what if you just don't have the caps and you just ship them anyways? They're like, well, I don't know. Like, he's like, what's the failure rate? They're like, we're not sure. And he's like, we'll take a chance on that. But basically what turned out is like batteries are almost never damaged in transit. And so the plastic cap was like this small thing, worth a couple pennies that they didn't have enough of. So they were just not going to deliver several thousand cars. And it's like, just go ahead and ship it without the cap. So always ask why, because he found people that were always pointing at one another saying, well, they told me and they told me. And so you have 2 different fingers pointing at each other. And when you really ask, like, who owns this decision? If nobody can point to the person that made the decision, then it's not a decision we need to do. He's like, if you can't pinpoint a decision down to a person, then ignore it, because then there's no good reason why to do it. And he accepts that he will over calibrate. So he's like, I want to have to recalibrate 10 to 20% of the time. He's like, if you don't have to recalibrate 10 to 20% of the time, it means you haven't pushed hard enough or been radical enough with your thinking. But just accept that not all these tests will work out, and that's fine. But if you're never recalibrating, that means you're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, a lot of interesting stuff there. Once again, because it is spring forward, and maybe my mental acuity is not completely 100%, but I'm going to start with the last. Mm-hmm. So I love this cushion or idea of it. And we've heard this and read this in other places, the whole buffer, like be smart about your goal setting. And we've gotten better at that here at Digible, but far from where we probably need to be. My question, and this probably isn't specifically laid out in the book, but is how regularly is he reviewing those expectations or forecasts? Because you can give somebody whiplash, it's like, it's never I can't row to this because I know it's always going to change. But then there's also, it can't be static. So was there any more revealed as far as like how often you should check into your assumptions?
No. And it's almost like see point number one about burning all his people out. It does not seem that he's very concerned with culture or just the impact to the individual human. It just, and oftentimes, I'll give this, it doesn't get to your timing. It's almost like what happens is he needs a crisis. That's what like fuels him and motivates him. And so there are multiple times in the book through his journey where everything's going cool. Like Tesla is the most valuable company in the world. And he'll be like on Thanksgiving and everything's chill. And Isaacson will be with him. And then all of a sudden he'll be like, I got to fly to Texas to handle this, like to build a launch pad for SpaceX. And everyone's like, why? He's like, we got to do it because we got to get to Mars because humans must be interplanetary. And if we don't do this, we won't. So he like invents this thing when everything was cool. And then he'll make them build like run around the clock to build a launch pad for something that's not even going to launch for like 6 months. And they're like, why? But he just pushes it. And there are times that works because it gets them to make leaps they wouldn't have made otherwise. But then obviously it has this impact on culture. So it does not seem that he has a formula for like how often to circle back, and he's not an operator in that way.
Yeah. It's more a feel, or as you said, when a crisis occurs, then that's when he does his inspecting. And that leads me back to kind of one of the other things you just shared was the cap on the battery, and then the windows being automated, but pay the $17 an hour worker and get it 100% of the time. So my statement, but not my question. So I have two, but my statement is that says either a lot about him or the people running his companies, because you just wonder with some of those examples. And that's where sometimes I question biographies, but it's like, was there really nobody except Elon Musk that could figure out, like, have a human do it instead of, the automated, window sealing? And was there nobody that thought about the cap? Because these things don't appear, and it doesn't, I'm just saying from the outside in, hearing it, that you need a genius to come in, walk the factory and realize that. It's kind of a sad statement, either on the people running the company or the realities of just how quickly people can become sheep, and institutionalize and just march, like ants, basically, your whole hive mindset, where they just can't think outside of themselves. And maybe those types of environments actually create that more than others, meaning when it's such a high driving, we've got to like hit these milestones. We have this huge vision that it breeds that than lesser ambitious companies where there's more, as you like to describe it, as deep think, but time to really reflect and think, so that something like that wouldn't require the CEO and founder and kind of mad genius to uncover. It's like the Buttheads meeting, with Nike. It's like, didn't Phil Knight make sure that there's enough time for his executive team so that he didn't have to find out about the battery cap?
I think you're right. There's some of that breeding. I think also some of it is there's not a lot of people in today's workforce. I mean, our education system does this to us too, where they're like, hey, show me the steps and I'll follow along, right? It's like, do this course, pass that test, and, whatever, versus the whole, think for yourself and question why. And so a lot of like the first principle he tries to really hammer into people is always question why. And so I think a lot of these examples are, to your point, that like some of his companies are growing fast and it's hard to like disseminate that kind of culture quickly. And so it takes time to like condition someone into the new question why. So one other example that I thought was really interesting was, again, when they were having trouble delivering cars at Tesla, he was like, why is it taking so long to put together this one part of the car? And they're like, well, it's because like we need to seal the driver's side floor panel. And he's like, but why? And they're like, well, once every 10 years, California has a flood that will raise 18 inches and it would get the driver's feet wet. And he's like, and who cares? he was like, why do we care about the driver's feet getting wet once a decade? It's like, just forget it, move on. And so he's so good at questioning why, but other people are like, well, this is the right thing to do, or seemingly they think it's the right thing to do, or someone told them in one meeting it was the right thing to do. But yeah, it's the question why is a principle he tries to get done throughout, but it seemed like each example was often him having to teach people to question why.
Yeah. Well, clearly Elon has not read 6 Types of Working Geniuses.
Yeah, right.
He should be hiring for discernment a little bit more at these companies. And I think the challenge, I'll translate this a little bit to Digible, and for those listening, like maybe they recognize this themselves, but just how ruthlessly or regularly, 2 different kind of adjectives there, but do you evaluate the trade-offs in decisions at the company or in your department or within your team? Because you don't want to slow things down, which I'm sure God knows Elon doesn't, but founders, operators, executives, but then you're also encouraging them to ask why. And it touches also on Jim Collins' whole productive paranoia. It's like there's over questioning and maybe asking why too much, and it's like nothing ever gets done. Everybody just wants to sit around and pontificate and talk trade-offs. Mm-hmm. Whereas another team, might be super high execution and they seem to get just stuff done, but they aren't striking enough of that deep thinking and asking why. And that's where, for me, it's hard not to go to formulas or some sort of guidance, some sort of direction, and God knows consultants are always eager to step in and try and offer that answer to you. But what's the right balance? Between I got to be a good soldier, even if I'm on the ELT, it's like, this is Elon's vision and I am going to execute, versus why. Mm-hmm. And, I'll say some quarterly planning sessions, I see very real examples of both, where it's like, I can tell that rock, and that strategy was planned more in like, I see A to B, I know where we're going, and I'm laddering up to that, and therefore we're going to do this. And then it's like, but why? What do you get the trade-offs inside of that? Mm-hmm. And then there might be example B, where it's like, I feel like they asked why too many times, mm-hmm. and couldn't commit, and just left things, as you say, squishy. It's like, are you laddering up? Are you going to execute? Are you ever going to get this done? Because you can't seem to get out of the way of yourself. So yeah, I don't mean to ramble on about it. It's just, it is one of the harder things, don't you think, to find that balance of, the questioning and the trade-offs versus like getting shit done.
I think it's I think one thing that Digible could benefit from, and I'm sure many of the folks listening at their organization, is quickly determining and setting what kind of company or culture do you want there. So back to the lesson of him saying he believes you should always be like adding back 20%. If you didn't cut so much where you have to add back 20%, you didn't cut it off. And that just then shows that he really wants to go lean, and that's the culture that they're advocating for. I think where companies get in trouble is when they don't define that culture. And I even think back to, as you said, Jim Collins, Southwest Airlines. They said, we're not competing with American Airlines. We're competing with Greyhound buses, right? Like that helps make it very illustrative about like, well, you don't need to serve hot food on a Greyhound bus, right? It just makes it way easier to have that, again, like that poster on the wall. So that's something Digible could benefit from, because oftentimes we try to do all of it. We want everybody to be innovative. We also want everyone to execute. And as you just pointed out, that's kind of like it can be an unrealistic thing and make it almost confusing for people to say, what are we really striving for?
Who the hell is the CEO at Digible?
Yeah, right. Who said vision?
You get it right, buddy.
Well, I know we don't have much time. We started late today, so we're going to get kicked out of this room. But one other thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was interesting from all of this is that lesson of like being willing to calibrate by pulling back. It shows it's a great lesson in flexibility to me. So there are many instances where he'll be headlong on like, we need to do self-driving cars, and we're going to do it by coding manually every single thing, that a car should do. And then he's headstrong on that for a decade. And then all of a sudden it's like, you know what why don't we just let the machine learn from watching other drivers drive? And we won't code it like deterministically. We'll just like let it learn from the people that drive our cars the best with the fewest number of accidents. They'll be our model. And we'll just say, machine, learn to drive like them. And he can change on a dime like that. So there are many times like that, such as being let's make our factory fully autonomous, or, what have you, where he will show that he's willing to go back on something. And I think that's super beneficial. And one reason he and his organizations make so much progress compared to others, because it seems that many people are afraid to make mistakes. And so to your point, they'll like over consider something for too long, versus if you can accept that I'm going to make mistakes like 10 or 20% of the time. What's my threshold? Let me just make a decision now, have a massive action plan towards it. And then if I'm wrong, I change my mind. If it didn't work out, I change my mind, and that's okay. But you and I see that all the time, where someone tries to get everything like buttoned perfect, and it's like, we can just accept that it will be wrong sometimes and make overall progress. And that's good. That's better than having a perfect project that goes slowly.
Is it fair to say that maybe that this book or that's shifted your thinking a little bit? And tell me if this is fair, but I feel like in the first few years when we started the company, that was something you were very sensitive to, was us going back, changing, calibrating, flipping. And now what I'm hearing, and not just since this book, but that you seem more open, or I don't know if forgiving is the right word, but just realizing, respecting, recognizing that is needed, or, that there is going to be the 20 to 30% failures, and don't feel too much ego or pride about, having to come back to the company on a specific initiative or strategy and saying, hey, we missed the mark. We need to make some changes. So I don't, if I'm, if that's, I guess positioning it wrong, but I just feel like in the first few years, you seemed concerned to me, like when we might have to calibrate.
Yeah, I think some of that. So yes, I think you're right that in many ways I'm okay with let's try it, but let's authentically and level-headedly come back and look at it and say, should we keep doing this? Yes or no, and not have that a pot committed attitude, or like the sunk cost fallacy. And I definitely had concerns of that in the beginning of the company. And part of that with us in the beginning of the company was you, I, and Nicole could only spend X amount of time on something, and then we need to leave it and move on and let it run on its own. We didn't have, it's what you were just saying about Musk. Why is he the one with the battery caps? Mm-hmm. It didn't feel that we had like a trusted fourth person, that integrator, to come in and be like, hey, they'll ask the question about why of the battery caps. And there's only so many places we could be.
Less margin for error in a way.
Yeah. It's so funny. Nicole used the Roy Kent. Did you watch Ted Lasso?
I thought that rang a bell. I watched the first 2 seasons, I think, which I enjoyed, but I haven't kept up with it.
It's an amazing show, obviously, but she was using it in reference to me but her thing was like, Roy Kent's song, and his song is like, he's there, he's here, he's there, he's everywhere. And that's like what the crowd says, because he was always running back and forth trying to save the team on the field. And she was saying like, David, that's how, you had to do it in the early days, is like you were Roy Kent all over the place. And I was like, yeah,
we should have done a song for you.
Yeah.
I think that's a very good comparison.
Yeah. So that was just amusing. But so I think that's part of the culture, right? So if going into whatever else we do in our careers, it seems important to me to set. We've done a great job setting vision, but also say, okay, what kind of culture do we want? Would we rather have it where everything has to be perfect, or would we rather take a stance of like 10% error rate and that's okay? So I think it's just important to decide on, and then it's that sort of like guiding light that you can keep communicating to everybody throughout the company.
Yeah, I suppose it gets to your principles, which you've been advocating for, and we should probably examine that a little bit deeper together for this year, versus assuming core values are descriptive enough when it comes to this culture that you're getting at. Because when I think about is the culture clear, set at Digible? I honestly believe most people would say, yeah, it's it's about empowerment. They probably would quickly get to our core values. That's all I'm saying is they'd be like, it's about being your authentic self. It's about humility. It's about focus. They really love curiosity, and growth, or we do. But what does that mean? What does that really mean? What's underneath that? And that's when you really, like, a culture crystallizes. The way that you're talking about some of those examples, could we define that, with examples right now at Digible? That might be a little bit harder for us to do. And that's probably the opportunity, because we have a great culture. I think the vision, for most of our employees is clear, and I'm not saying this in a defensive way. I think you agree with that, but I see the gap. I'll say, I suppose, based on what you're saying, as far as getting a little bit further with defining our culture.
Yeah, I'd say we've done a better job of culture than any other place I work. So if you think back at like Verizon Yellow Pages, right? Like, what
the bar's a little low here, David. Let's just admit it.
Exactly. But
they're big companies.
Yeah. But I do think, like, even team culture is important, right? Like, I feel a difference of, like, Aaron joining as CTO and the way he's trying to build his culture of his team. So it's what Jim Collins says of, like, just because you're not CEO, this is again for the listeners, it doesn't mean you're not in charge of your own short bus, as he says. You're in charge of that short bus, and what's the culture of the short bus? Do we default to the passing lane, right? Or are we sticking in the right lane and we never pass? I think that's just healthy for everyone to figure out and communicate, and that's great opportunity for. And you just went through, it's another episode, but the identity workshop with our executive team.
So interesting. You're right. I can't believe that didn't occur to me, but hopefully everybody, I'll get everyone to sign a waiver before we do that one, because what David's referring to is we did a workshop with our executive team on our desired identities as individuals and as a team. And we asked ourselves to force rank the top 5 characteristics, kind of your brand, your reputation that you'd like to build. And then, some descriptors, and had some great dialogue between it. But I'm going to use this as a cliffhanger, but there were so many interesting kind of deviations, I guess, or different turns that you guys took. And when I say you guys, I mean myself included, in how we thought about it, how we interpreted it, as far as, this is already my identity, I don't need to, like, be additive, and then others being way more additive, like focusing on the gaps, versus kind of our current identity, which is also something that we kind of scored as it related to the where we were trying to go. So lots of fun stuff. So thanks for the reminder. Now we know what the next Digible Dudes podcast will be about. Yeah. When we don't have a guest.
Yeah, when we don't. Well, anyways, I hope you all got something out of this. I found it interesting. Some of those points. It's a fun read. It's a good audiobook. If it's not one I would say you have to power through. It's more of like, I think I did it over like 8 weeks or something. And, I'm always listening to something. So it'd be like, all right, I'm in the mood to hear some more stories. And those, sometimes those stories were really interesting. And it helped in some ways personally give me confidence of, like, nobody has it all figured out. Even, Elon, that has all this stuff, and almost like what not to do. And then in some ways inspirational to say, here's what, we should consider doing. So anyways, good book by Walter Isaacson, but his books usually, this is, I think, the first book he's done where the person's still alive. So, like, that's always weird for me too, with a biography, where it's like,
it's usually posthumous or posthumous, or however you pronounce that.
Sure.